Have you ever said something only to realize that you've hurt somebody unintentionally? Or maybe you'd done something without really thinking about the consequences and then realizing that you'd landed yourself or somebody else in trouble? A word that's been spoken cannot be unspoken. A deed that's been done cannot be undone. That's why it is very important that we learn how to think before we speak and before we act. But hang on a minute. Did I say learn how to think? Aren't we all born with a natural ability to think intelligently? Although that may be true to a certain extent, it does not mean that we all develop our cognitive capacities to the same extent. Thinking is a skill, and just like any other skill, we need to practice and to learn how to improve our thinking. But how can we learn how to think? Fortunately, there are various tools and techniques that we can use to help us improve our thinking. Professor Edward de Bono, of lateral thinking fame, has developed a number of tools in order to help us improve our thinking. One of these programs of his is called the Cognitive Research Trust, in short, CORT, and this is comprised of a number of tools. The AGO. First of all, it is very important that we have a clear objective, a clear aim. So we need to be aware of what we are trying to achieve before we speak and before we act. In Professor de Bono's terminology, this is called the AGO, Aims, Goals and Objectives. This is based on the premise that if we know what our goals are, then we are much more likely to achieve them. Second of all, before making any decisions, or before we say something or do something, it is important that we make a deliberate effort to see that we are not leaving out any important details. We need to carry out a CAF, consider all factors. It may sometimes be a little bit difficult for us to think of all the factors because we might leave something out and we might forget something here and there. Therefore, it would help to speak to a friend or to a colleague or to somebody that you know to help us do a CAF with us to see if we are leaving any important information out. Once we have done a CAF, it might be useful to do a FIP, First Important Priorities. Of course, when making a decision, it's very difficult to consider all the factors once again, so we need to prioritize, see which are the factors that are the most important. In some cases, we need to look at the pros and the cons of a situation. Professor de Bono has developed a tool for this purpose too. It's called the PMI. It stands for plus, minus and interesting. Under the plus, we list all of the positive points. Under the minus, we list all of the negative points. And under the interesting, we list those points that are neither negative nor positive, but are interesting, something that we might need to explore further. The PMI is a very useful tool as it helps us refrain from rejecting an idea prematurely. Very often we say things and we do things and end up hurting people or affecting people in ways that we didn't really think that we would. The OPV, Other People's Views, is a very useful tool to help us avoid doing that sort of thing. Now, although being considerate towards other people's feelings and opinions has value in itself, it can also help us achieve our goals, because very often there may be people who would have some sort of power on how to affect our outcomes, influence our outcomes. Therefore, it is important to think in advance how our decisions, how our words and our actions will influence these people, how they will feel, how they will react. Another common mistake that many people do is that we fail to consider the consequences. Everything we do and everything that we don't do has a consequence. The C&S, consequence and sequel, is a very useful tool to help us consider the immediate consequences, short-term consequences, medium-term consequences, and also the long-term consequences of our action. One final tool that I would like to tell you about is called the APC, Alternatives, Possibilities and Choices. Very often we think that we have no choice in a situation, that we have to say something or that we have to act in a certain way. However, in reality, if we look hard enough, there are always more than one way to look at the situation, always more than one explanation for somebody's actions, always more than one solution to a problem, and of course, always more than one choice of action for any particular case. All we need to do is sit down or stand and make a deliberate effort at thinking about different alternatives, possibilities and choices. I would like to conclude by reminding you once again that thinking is a skill. And just like any other skill, we can learn how to improve the skill by practice, practice and some more practice.